Hi guys, this is Luke.
And Gabriel.
This is Clinical Trial Talk. What are we talking about today?
Well, I thought it might be interesting to see, okay, so we know a bit about clinical trials now, but who's actually behind the clinical trials? Who runs clinical trials?
Who runs clinical trials? Oof. Okay. Am I answering this one? Or I'm going to attempt to answer it. What normally consists, a clinical trial will normally consist of what you call a sponsor. Okay, that's the group, the company, an institution, whoever's putting the money up and in charge of running that clinical trial.
Yeah.
Then what you have is a trial site, right? And that's where the actual clinical trial will be conducted.
We'll start writing this up.
Yeah, that's a good point. So sponsors are really the groups that are behind the trial and trying to run the study. Trial sites or investigator sites, investigators are usually the doctors that are involved in actually conducting the study itself. And it might be a clinical trial for healthy volunteers. It could be a clinical trial for specific patient groups or specific illnesses and things like that. So you might have more than one trial site. You might have just one trial site. And then just to make it even more confusing for you, sometimes the trial site or the investigator in the trial site or the doctor in the trial site, it may be an investigator-initiated clinical trial study, IIS study, investigator-initiated, in which case they are sometimes also the sponsor, okay?
Yeah.
Or they might be funded by a grant-funded study from a government group, or it might be funded by some kind of charity organization.
I think these ones are more typical, like, for example, in universities where it's the university or the people within the university that are both designing the trial and then getting people into the university to
sometimes,
run as well.
Sometimes, but then the university kind of is the trial site, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. They're the ones that.
Or it could be a teaching hospital. So it'll be
Sure,
a hospital,
sure.
but it'll be some kind of connectivity with the university or a non-for-profit or an institution or something like that. Right?
So that's one type of sponsor, I suppose. But
The other option for that is sometimes the sponsor, and it could be a pharma company, might say,
Exactly.
hey, you're the key opinion leader in that particular area. We want to get a protocol or some kind of a study going in this particular area to test whether or not or prove whether this works. So that's when that person, they may be funded by the sponsor, but they take on the responsibility of the sponsor and the site, which is can be a bit confusing, but ultimate responsibility for the study really lies on the sponsor and the investigator. So it really does ultimately come back to the sponsor to make sure that that investigator is doing things properly and they keep an eye on it and make sure they do things according to GCP, which stands for good clinical practice.
So when you say investigator, just going back a little bit, what is the investigator doing?
Well, the investigator helps to identify patients for the study. They have overall oversight at the trial site. They have a lot of requirements in terms of sticking to good clinical practice or GCP in terms of the consent process, making sure things are done properly. They can delegate tasks to suitable staff to help to run the study. And so they're really in charge of how an actual trial is running on the coalface, so to speak, where the trial's being run.
So they're the ones collecting the data, they're the ones interacting with
yes, collecting the data. Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the sponsor is more dealing with probably the funding and I think the overall design of the clinical trial.
Yeah, and the product
as well. Yes,
else.
exactly.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, some investigators have their own products they're trying to get going as well, and so it might be self-funded. It might not be funded by any big group. That's completely controlled by them. But more often than not, as you get further down the phases of development, you'll have more and more sites involved because you need more and more patients to prove whether or not it's not just safe, but it's also potentially efficacious or whether it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
So I think no, you're right. So there's two different roles. You've got the sponsor role and the trial site role, but those two roles don't necessarily have to be two different people or two different organizations. They can be
the same, but really they're kind of separate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in terms of the actual doctors or the investigator and the trial sites, what type of trial sites are running studies? You might have universities, you might have institutions or even sort of non-for-profit type organizations that are attached to hospitals. You might have hospitals themselves or clinics within hospitals. You might have private clinics. you might have.
I mean,
Well,
the purest
that's pretty
form
much.
is
It's a
the
clinic test. Clinical trials involve a clinic, right? So there's some clinical aspect where patients are involved or people, right? So usually it's in a clinic environment, whether or not that's in whatever kind of entity type.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
But you can have standalone trial sites that are purely just for running clinical
Oh,
trials.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yep.
they don't have to be necessarily attached to or serve
That's right.
a dual purpose. They can be
Exactly.
themselves. Probably wrap up.
Let us know if you got any questions. Was that really clear, or was that just a mumble
A
jumble?
bit of a crash course, I think. But I think it's good. It starts the discussion, and we're happy to elaborate on any aspects that you find confusing or interesting.
Thanks a lot for your attention, guys. Hit like and subscribe, and invite your friends and share and all that good stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye, guys.